Nurses of psych wards, what did a patient do that left you speechless? Please consider subscribing if you enjoy the video. This was actually in a state hospital that is part of the prison system for mentally ill offenders. Patient asked for Vaseline, which is fine. They can have Vaseline, whatever. But this patient was given a whole tub, so of course he stripped completely naked, covered himself in Vaseline, and ran. It was a secure unit, and he didn't escape. But we couldn't get him back into his cell all shift because he was too freaking slippery. No more tubs. This might not fit perfect, but I love this story. How about in an inpatient addiction clinic? The first one that comes to mind was something I witnessed between a patient and another floor tech. We had a man who was in serious detox. Drug of choice was meth. He was throwing a huge tantrum. Not uncommon in DTs. People will do just about anything to get a fix. We weren't a locked facility, so it wasn't like he was stuck there. He genuinely wanted help. That's why he stuck around, and we were there to listen and help him through the shakes, hallucinations, and other symptoms. He was slamming his fists on the desk at this point, and he had started just yelling, "I just want some freaking ice." Slang for crystal meth. Well, the tech with me was inexperienced, although much older than me, and while I talked to him and tried to calm him down, she went back to our staff kitchen and got him a glass of ice. Like frozen water. She brought it out to him and put it in his hand like, problem solved. And the guys just froze with confusion, staring at it. The patient and I both realized at the same time she thought he wanted ice, and we just started at each other and started laughing. He was in for a rough couple of days, but I've never seen someone jump from near psychotic episode to giggling so fast. I was a CNA for about 4 years, and the saddest ever was my client/resident constantly thought I was her daughter. She went to Harvard and was an extremely brilliant lady in her time. She was non-verbal, but every time I walked into her room she would exclaim, "Elizabeth, you came." I loved this lady so much. She would only eat when I fed her. She was extremely combative with everyone but me. I ended up quitting my job there but visited her every single day, to the point that her family kind of accepted me as their family. I finally found out that Elizabeth took her own life at 21, and the fact that she thought I was her gave her extreme joy. I never corrected her, and I like to think I gave her peace when she passed holding my hand. She was an amazing lady and I miss her to this day. Prison guard here. Guy cut his scrotum open to let people know he was serious. Don't know about what. Guy 2 cut off a butt cheek, or a big part of, and threw it at me as I tried to stop him. Guy 3 punched the wall 3 times really hard, bloody knuckles, and told me he punched the devil cause he was telling him to stab me, but I am cool, so he told the devil to frick off. Guy 4 pretended to drown himself in a toilet, basically splashed pee on his face and rolled around crying. Guy 5 had sex with a window air vent and was compliant yet confused when I asked him to stop. Those were the days. Years ago, I was a student nurse doing my psych rotation in a Catholic facility. The nuns still wore habits and the building was like something out of the Dark Ages. I'll skip talking about the line of patients waiting to undergo ECT treatment in the basement and instead tell you about Maggie. She was a tragic case. She had been on lithium for years and it really kept her psychotic episodes in check until reached toxic levels and could no longer take it. One hot summer afternoon, we heard this banshee screaming coming from Maggie's room. We rushed in there to see what was going on. Entering the room, we are greeted by a scene I will never forget. This late 70s woman is standing on the window ledge, naked as a jaybird, screaming through the window screens at the nuns in the courtyard. "You freaking penguins are going to burn in hell." The poor sisters are scrambling to and fro trying to get away from the ranting mad woman's viscous verbal assault as we were trying desperately to pull her off the grating. I knew then and there that I would never become a psych nurse. Psych ward counselor here. Early in my career I had a teenage girl with suicidal ideations and severe depression. The year before, on Thanksgiving, her dad pulled a gun from under the dinner table and blew his brains out in front of everyone. I normally form a response pretty quickly, even a wow. But when she told me, I got quiet, leaned back, exhaled, and had to gather my thoughts. Had a catatonic guy who could play the piano like a pro, classic, jazz, ragtime, but otherwise just sat in his chair and stared. Had a guy come in with pictures of families pasted on his feet because he wanted to be close to them. We had a psych patient on our floor that wasn't really crazy, just really confused and unpleasant in general. One night I was mixing his drink with some thickener, and per usual he started yelling about me poisoning him. I explained what it was and that we're all here to help him, not hurt him, and he responds with, "I'm just going to die." His vitals were fine. He was alert, no red flags, and like I said, He was always pretty unpleasant, so I didn't think much of it. Sure as shit, he coded an hour later and we never got him back. Not a nurse. Pharmacist. Had one of our clozapine patients miss a monthly meeting to discuss their medication. Called around. Found out she was in the ICU having eaten 2 of her own fingers, then visited her mother for coffee. Still bleeding. Had a friend tell me of another patient. Made a cut in his thigh and reopened it regularly until the whole thing was a scar tissue cavern. By some miracle avoiding infection. Started using his meat pocket to hold pens and coins and anything he could collect in his ward. Nobody knew until a paperclip pierced the side and he finally wound up with an infection that took him to ICU where they found his stash. Not a nurse, but have had several stays on psychiatric wards for bipolar. To be fair, on most occasions, I didn't enter the wards in the most rational and stable state myself, but what has tended to happen is that even when they bring you back down to earth, you can end up staying for an extra month or 2 before they let you go. So I have spent some time on psychiatric wards completely sane, if not maybe firing on all cylinders. Anyway, I have seen a few shocking things, like a guy cutting open his wrists with broken glass and bleeding out pretty severely, but to be honest, you quickly become desensitized. What tended to leave me speechless was the abruptness of certain behavior and its total incongruence with facial expressions, etc. For example, sitting watching a TV when a 5-foot-tall 7-stone woman calmly walks over, suddenly lifts the TV up and throws it into the wall with great force, smashing it to bits, and then calmly sits back down in an armchair declaring that the TV was ruining her painting. She wasn't painting, by making the armchair give her an orgasm. She never even raised her voice. She then immediately asked me, as if it was somehow related, if I like Lisa Stansfield. When I was a student doing a placement in a maximum security unit, a serial rapist was getting meds. Made a silly joke. The nurse said, "Oh, stop that." His response was, "I've heard that before." I'm not a nurse, but was a patient once. Giant dude got upset. One dude changed the channel from a football game he was watching and smashed his skull with his fists. Not fully, but enough that when they brought him back a few days later he started seizing and had to be removed again. Didn't see him again. Also, there was one lady who was straight out of the movies, walking around preaching the end of days loudly and sweating like crazy. Not me, but my dad used to work in Airedale and J Ward, Australian Insane Asylum and Prison for the Criminally Insane, respectively, in the 70s. He used to talk about sunny days in J Ward where they'd bring out all the inmates during a sunny day and they'd promptly line up and start jacking off. In Airedale they'd deal with a jacking off problem by strapping you into cotton mittens, but a lot of the inmates would chew a hole through them just to get a finger out to jack off with. His worst story was about a psychotic woman in Airedale. She had self-inflicted scars all over her face from scratching herself, self-imposed bite marks all over her body from trying to eat herself. And she had the nasty habit of chewing the inside of her mouth and spitting blood at your eyes and mouth, hoping you'd catch one of the myriad of diseases she carried. I'm an RN in Boston in a psych hospital and I've seen some shit. One of the things I'll never ever forget was we had this manic guy. THST had been transferred from another unit cause he kept getting in fights over there and all the other patients were trying to attack him. I was still working nights back then and at about 3 AM he came up to me and said his tooth hurt and he needed to see a dentist right away. I said I don't have a dentist for him to see, but when the doctor comes in the morning we can take a look. Gave him some Tylenol and sent him back to bed. About 5 minutes later he came out saying it really hurt and he needed to see a dentist to pull his tooth. Again I told him there's no dentist, but maybe I can get some more pain meds. In the middle of me explaining this to him he sticks his hand in his mouth and rips his molar out of his head and handed it to me. Blood starts pouring out of his mouth, but he didn't even seem to notice. After I clean him up and get the bleeding to stop and call the doctor to get him summative, and he goes, "Make sure you give me that tooth back when I leave. That's my tooth, don't try and steal it." Freaking wild shit. I'm a tech at a psych hospital, but I start nursing school in August, so I hope this counts. We had a very tall, heavy-set man who swung at a nurse and a fellow tech when they asked him to not stand naked in the door and flash the whole unit. So we put him in a hold and escorted him to the seclusion room. From there he tried to strangle himself with his underwear. He had them on his head like a bandana. So we opened the door and took those away. Then he peed all over the floor, did push-ups, and every time he came down he would slurp it up. Eventually he got bored of that and began writing on the wall in his pee, and then masturbated onto the door and said it would be better if he could frick my dead corpse. Eventually his IMB-52 kicked in and he contacted for safety/good behavior, so we opened the door again, and he bit me on the hand and drew blood. From there I got permission to not be involved in the code and the Pierce swapped me out. I'm assaulted on a weekly basis, and we aren't even an acute care facility. I'm very excited to go PRN in August. $15.38/HR is not worth it. Not a nurse, but I used to be a security guard in a hospital, and we had a patient who self-harmed and cut a hole into themselves around their belly button and then stuck a bunch of paper clips and buttons and things like that into it. I watched a guy try to remove rats from his rectum, stated that his ex-girlfriend summoned them there. He ended up tearing his rectal walls to shreds. Pharmacist here. Had a patient getting discharged from the ER when they found out 2 police officers were waiting outside to take them in on an outstanding warrant. Patient grabbed the doctor's coffee mug, smashed it on a desk, and then tried to slit their own throat with the broken mug. Caused lacerations needing stitches, but luckily nothing serious. Not me. But a friend is a behavioral consultant for a psyche ward and once told me a story about a patient that casually approached another patient and proceeded to pin him against the wall and bite his eyelid off. Probably the saddest was a resident I had a long time ago. This gentleman was a WW2 vet with Alzheimer's and dementia. Probably once or twice a month he would relive some battle he was in. He would literally run up the hallway and grab you and yell at you to get down behind the sandbags. He would then tell you take his Thompson because it was too heavy for him. He would just use his pistol. Then he would get up and run back down the hallway. This guy was old, and seeing him run full sprint like that up and down the hallway during one of his episodes was surreal. I can't imagine having to constantly relive the worst moments of your life where you witnessed and survived the unspeakable horrors of war. Was interviewing a guy in psych ward and he was complaining about how he couldn't have any whiteout, a liquid eraser for typewriters because he was on suicide watch. Claimed it was stupid because if he wanted to kill himself, as he pointed out, he could use the drawstring from the blinds to hang himself, or he could use his pencil to stab himself, or use a typewriter metal bar to off himself. I agreed it was silly to hold back the small bottle of liquid whiteout. When I relayed the convo to my instructor about how silly it seemed due to him having several other ways, she replied that he proved to me that he had been considering ways to kill himself, and that's why he was able to come up with so many so quickly. He never did get his whiteout. My sister was actually sectioned earlier this year for her eating disorder. She shouldn't have been, but that's a story for another time. And she was right next to the PICU, psychiatric intensive care unit. One of the nights she heard multiple screams coming specifically from that ward. One of the patients had bit a chunk out of a nurse's leg as they were trying to detain them. They then started eating said chunk. It's crazy to think these types of things happen. 60-something old woman would come out of her room every so often at night topless and holding out her saggy breasts, saying in broken English, "My nipples, nipples, my nipples, please, for the children." 40-something woman would sneak the shower mat out of the bathroom to put under her bed because she was God and we were stealing her power by electrocuting her vagina every night. The floor mat apparently stopped this from happening. A severely schizophrenic woman used to tell me that my name was the worst fairy tale lie that she ever wrote in the 2 Bibles for her daddy. When she was angry with me, she would yell at me and say, "Get out of here, fairy tale book. I wish I never wrote you." That same woman attacked some nursing students who were attempting to use tissues over lollipops to make ghost props for Halloween. She didn't seem to like this, and while trying to hit them was yelling, "You idiots. You can't make ghosts out of lollipops." Again, same woman but different group of nursing students brought in several pizzas for an end of semester party. The woman then walked up and down the tables looking at the pizzas. Then out of nowhere she started throwing the pizza and yelling, "What's this supposed to be? Some kind of pizza test?" We had a gero-psych floor. Crazy old people. One night while passing through, a little old lady popped her head out her doorway and said to me, "I could sure use the company of a good-looking young man tonight." "Sorry, I'm not that good-looking." Quick as snot on a doorknob, she said, "That's okay. I can't see too well." I didn't join her, but her charisma was on point. Not a nurse, but I was a patient in a psych ward. The ward was sectioned into 2 sides based on case severity. I was on the less severe side. One night, an incredibly tall, somewhat muscular man escaped his room on the severe side, got through a door that was supposed to be locked, got into the less severe side, and into my room. I woke up, sat up, and saw him standing in my doorway. He asked in a shaky voice if I was alright. I hesitantly said yes, to which he responded by getting a look of terrified horror and screamed, "I knew it. You can see them too. Don't let them get you," before he was dragged away screaming by security. Not me, but when my sister was in a psych ward for an eating disorder, a girl tried to strangle someone with a bra. Last year my other sister was in there because she was suicidal and a kid tore a water fountain off the wall. Another kid screamed for his shoes, and personally my favorite was a kid whose mother told him he was going on a vacation but instead admitted him into a psych ward. Then he screamed to one of the staff, "That bitch lied to me." Thank you all for the comments you've been leaving. Keep the conversation brewing. My sister has been a psychiatric nurse for around 10 years or so and has told me all sorts of stories about her times. She is physically assaulted on an almost daily basis, has been threatened with everything you can imagine. People have thrown, smeared or ingested pretty much every bodily fluid available on the wards. She has just finished a degree retraining as a teacher because she no longer enjoys the profession. Edit. Man didn't expect this to blow up. Just to answer some of the points people have raised, she knows teaching a stressful career. Also we have family and education, so they've pre-warned her on the pitfalls. People suggesting changing nursing fields. She did consider it, but then this training came up, in Scotland. Maybe the entire UK? I don't know. If you have certain degrees you can retrain for a teaching degree for free while you work. So it gave her a semi-easy out and freed her from night shifts and stuff with her own kids. Please subscribe if you like the video. It really helps the channel to grow. Adios.